Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our advancing up the path to a Kodesh Baruch Hu, the Mesilas Yesharim, finding your path. We're in chapter 19, your test, and we're moving on to the section now about the honoring of Shabbos and Yom Tov. Anything that a person can think that he would honor a guest of flesh and blood is the way that he should honor Shabbos. We say in the Musaf prayer of Shabbos, the Kanto Shabbos Utzisa B'Kon Nesechet Sivisi Parashar Im Sidur Nesecha Ma'angea L'Olam Chavod Yin Chalu. Ma'angea, the construction of Ma'angea is the one who gives pleasure to Shabbos. Ma'angea, the mem makes it causative. The one who gives pleasure to Shabbos. So what does that mean, you give pleasure to Shabbos? I think I mentioned this last week or the week before, and I certainly mentioned it once during the series of talks. An idea that I heard from Rabbi Leib Kellerman, a beautiful idea that Shabbos is a bria. Shabbos, so to speak, takes a walk down your street on Erev Shabbos and takes a peek in your door and sees people rushing around ready to greet her or him or her. Oh, this is a nice place, I'm going to stay Shabbos here. Shabbos peeks around the door and says, nobody's ready, nobody really cares. And he goes on traveling down the week, which is why when you feel Shabbos, it's because Shabbos has decided to bestow herself on you. Ma'angea, when you give pleasure to Shabbos, when you then, you're going to inherit kavod. The person who is mechabed, somebody who's mechabed acherim, other people, abrius. The idea is that whatever a person can conceive of being worthy of the honor of a guest of flesh and blood should be extrapolated and applied to Shabbos Kodesh. Many examples we're going to see. So we know, we spoke about before the idea Shekivan shekava his ames lonu shekavodo mitzvah. We know already that we've seen that enhancing a mitzvah it's part of the mitzvah itself is hidur mitzvah. Therefore, it means that we have to think about many different kinds of honor that we can honor Shabbos with. Shekol maase shabo nira chashivus l'Shabbos tzrichem onu lasoso. Anything that we could think of that is something which will bring honor to Shabbos, which is why we have beautiful tablecloth, we have beautiful food, we dress up with special clothing, anything that, and of course, these are things which a person should extrapolate according to his own understanding. And this is for this reason, the sages themselves would engage in the preparation of Shabbos, ish lefi darko, each person according to his unique way. Rabbi Abau haya Yosef a tachtocho de shina u menashe nura. He would sit on a stool of ivory to show he was performing a distinguished task, and he'd fan the fire. He'd use this special stool to fan the fire. There's a famous Gemara, the Mishnah at the beginning of Perek Beis of Kedushin, which talks about Rav Safra, who would singe the head of an animal and ready to burn off the hair, ready to prepare the animal for Shabbos. Rava Molach Shibuta, Rava would pickle, salt, fish, herring in other words. Shibuta isn't a herring, but that's the same idea. Rav Huna Madlik Shraga, Rav Huna would light candles, not just the regular candles, of course, but candles all over the house, many candles. Rav Papa Godel Pesilta, he would twist wicks for the candles. Rav Chista Porem Silka, he would mince the beets. All of these, and of course the idea of that the Amoraim, many of them anyway, were very wealthy people, and for sure they could have servants to do this. But the idea, in fact, that's what the sugya over there is about, is mitzvah yosef b'shluchoi. A mitzvah is more, that's a discussion on what more means, but it's it's better to do the mitzvah by yourself, and therefore they personally would do these preparations for Shabbos Kodesh. Because of course it's more of a coverage for Shabbos. It goes Rav Nachman, Mechatev for oil, Metachev for nofik. He would lift up bundles of things for Shabbos, Shabbos food, Shabbos requisites. He'd bring them in and he'd make room for them. He had a servant to do this, but he'd do it himself. And Amar Ravasi, Makalin li Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi milo chatvano kamayu. And he said, if Rav Ami and Rav Asi were to visit me, wouldn't I clear out some space for them to sit down? If Shabbos is coming, Allah has come for Kama, how much more so I should do the same for Shabbos. There's another, he brings here, V'tireh, Hekshu shel Rav Nachman, that sheyesh lonu mimenu mokom limud. We can take an example from Rav Nachman as a proper way to honor Shabbos. Ki hinei haya mizbonein mea haya hu oiseh. He would spend time. In other words, when somebody honorable was coming to visit him, he would think about what color the tablecloth would be, how we would go out and greet this particular person, how the servants would line up, say, at the door. And if you look like the way they go to great, what's his name? Trump just, the King of England just had a reception for Trump. And of course, you know, the British know how to do this thing, I think, better than anybody. They've had hundreds and hundreds of thousands, maybe, of years, 1,000 years of experience of pomp and circumstance. So, and they, you know, have all of these, like, there's some person in the palace who actually goes around making sure that all the cutlery ends at the same place. You know, the knives are not more, they're all in line. All the chairs are a certain fixed distance from the table. All to be mechabed, an honored guest. This is the way he should, that's what he says, that Rav Nachman would reflect upon what he would do for a guest, an honored guest of flesh and blood, and extrapolate that with regard to Shabbos. And as he says, a person should always be, how do you say, orum is like, it means naked, it means eyes should be open. He should be resourceful when it comes to Yiras Shamayim. In other words, a person should divide tactics to the natural instinct of a person is to be lazy. The natural instinct of a person, because we don't see Hashem, a person has to make an effort to evoke inside him Yiras Shamayim, to contemplate, to think, to picture. We've been talking about a lot in this book about conjecturing, picturing in our minds things which are not immediately apparent to our senses. Hashem gave us an imagination. Why? So when we're davening, we can, to a certain extent, we can, I won't use the word visualize, but we can conceptualize the idea that we're praying to a supreme being who's interested in what we have to say. So he would extrapolate that idea, and that's the Gemara in Brachos, that a person should be orum. He should be resourceful. And in the same way as that applies to Yiras Shamayim, so similarly that applies also to covered Shabbos, and to apply the same, to extrapolate one thing from another. In other words, we're going to see a lot of the things he's going to bring up in this chapter are actually not Chassidus. We're going to see ideas and points he brings up which are Ne'ikei Hadin. The point is that from the Ikrei Hadinim of Shabbos, so in other words, like if a person knows what somebody else likes, if let's say I like cheesecake, so you know, and my wife knows that there's a special cheesecake shop in Haifa, and she goes all the way there for my birthday to get some cheesecake from this. So that's the idea. In other words, the Shem tells us, kaviyochel, so to speak, I like cheesecake, as it were. So we think, okay, Hashem likes cheesecake. So where can I find the best cheesecake? How can I serve the cheesecake in the best possible way? How can it be presented in the best possible way? This is what we're talking about when we talk about Derech Hasidus, when it comes to being mahada, the mitzvahs, and specifically Shabbos and Yom Tov, as we're saying here. Now, he brings up why does this do? Because he brings up another point here. Because asher alkein ma asher yisyaches loy yeh nigbod oleinu kavod godel. I'm sorry, I missed a part out here. Laharos heyosenu makirim godel ramusa oleinu. To the extent that we honor Hashem and the mitzvahs and Shabbos specifically, this demonstrates how we recognize the great loftiness that Hashem has over us, how high Hashem is. Clearly, the more a person is mechabed, a person or HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this case, this really comes from a sense of how lowly I am. I think I once spoke about the idea of the avos. We'll mention again briefly. The avos stand for three distinct midos. Avram Avinu is the midah of chesed. Chesed is the idea of hispashtus, of going out. Avram Avinu went out to the world to bring people b'tachas kamfei shechina, under the wings of the divine presence. He went out, expansiveness. Yitzchak Avinu on the other hand never left Eretz Yisrael. He is the pachad Yitzchak, the fear. So there's the idea on the one hand, there's expansiveness and symptom, contraction, the fear to go out, so to speak. The synthesis of the two is kavod. Kavod is the midah of Yaakov Avinu. Ein kavod ela Torah. Torah is connected specifically to Yaakov Avinu. And the idea of kavod, let me give you an example. Let's say the Gadol Ador, his mashbak, his equerry rings you up on Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock and says, well, it better be early than that nowadays, let's say 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and says, I don't know, that's somebody very, in our day maybe I remember, like Rav Dov Schwarzman's at Zeikel Livracha. Once he came over to my place on Shabbos afternoon. For a certain reason he wanted to come in. But I remember the feeling of the one hand, the tremendous desire to go out, to be close. That's the idea of hispashtus. And the other hand, the fear to be close. The fear to go out. The synthesis of these two, of hispashtus and symptom, of the desire to go out and the fear to go out, is what we call kavod. The desire to be close and the fear to be close. So the idea of, we're talking about here, this shows yira. When a person has yira of flesh and blood, alachas kam v'kam v'kodesh baruch hu, it results in kavod. There's the desire to be close. That's the ahava, so to speak. And the yira, on the other hand, the fear of being close. These two things meld, the synthesis of these two things is what we call kavod, which we call honor. I think I mentioned in previous times, maybe a while ago, that apparently there was a Talmud who, whenever he would call out Rav Moshe Feinstein to ask him a shaila, he would put on a hat and stand up. He was on the telephone. Covered. This is his feeling that he, even though he's talking to the Rav, for example, I know myself, if I pick up the phone and it's somebody choshev and let's say I'm in bed, so I'll get out of bed, I just don't feel comfortable lying in bed talking to somebody. This is the sort of idea that gives you the feeling of the more you mechabed the Shabbos, the more mechabed the Yom Tov, you are basically mechabed Hashem, which shows you recognize the loftiness of Hashem and the lowliness that we exist on. And that's what he's saying here. This demonstrates that we recognize the great extent, the Roma Musa Oleinu, Asher Alkein Kol Ma, Sheyisiachis Lo Yeh Nichbod Oleinu Kavod. Anything where we can be mechabetim, we're mechuyev to be mechabetim. Given who is Baruch the Betuva Gadol Im Kol Shiflu Seinu, and since Hashem, in His abundant goodness, in spite of all our lowliness, is prepared to have this desired ba'anvanoso lachlok lonu kavod ulimsor lonu divrei kudushosoi, and to apportion to us His holy words, His mitzvahs. Lefachois, at the very least, b'kol kochenu nechabdem. We have to honor them. V'nare hayoka asher lehem etzleinu, and demonstrate with all our koyach, with all our power, how dear and important they are to us. I mean, it's clear that I think it's axiomatic we can never repay Hashem for what He gives us. Never, ever. It's not possible to repay Hashem for even Olam Hazeh, even life in this world, let alone Olam Haba. But the very least, we should show our appreciation as much as we're able to. Granted, we'll never be able to in any way repay, but at least to show our appreciation by giving tremendous cover to His mitzvahs and His desires, which are, of course, the mitzvahs. And, of course, he's now moving on to this idea that this really is an approach, being mechabed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being mechabed the mitzvahs, is an expression of yira. V'tireh shezos hi hayira ha'amitis shahaya yiras haromamus shezachanu. This is the true fear of Hashem, when we go out of our way and we do everything we can possibly think of to be mechabed the mitzvahs of Hashem. And that's what he said. That's the true fear. Yiras haromamus, the what we call in English awe, AWE, which we've mentioned. Shabbat tluy hakavod hamiskarev el chibuv ha'ava. And upon that depends that deep reverence, that deep kavod is the level of, brings us to a level which is above the level of yira, which is of ava, which is of love. Yeah. In other words, both are expressions, both the yira and the ava are expressions of the great privilege of serving Hashem. And then, therefore, when the person's awe is expressed to the maximum degree, that brings him, that translates into a deep reverence, as we said, a deep yiras romamus, and also that brings us close to doing the mitzvahs from a true sense of ava, from love. Okay, now, as we said, and then we just finish off here, this is in contradistinction to the fear of punishment. That's not the main part of yira, as we said before. It's an approach to yiras haromamus. Has to come through yiras ha'oinish, the fear of being punished. But that's not the main fear that Hashem wants us to have. And of course, these milas of kavod and of love are not going to come from that. Okay, so that's what he said. That does not bring us to the virtues that we are discussing now. Only yiras haromamus brings to feelings of love and fear of retribution, while it motivates us to fulfill the mitzvahs and hopefully kickstarts us on that ladder. That is not going to bring to the ava, or that is the ultimate stop on the line. Okay, now we're going to go back. We're going back to specifically Shabbos and different ways that the sages honored Shabbos. Rav Anan wore a gunda. A gunda, this is a dahainu shahya lovesh beged shocho be'er Shabbos. There are two pshatim here, why he did this. The Ramchal's pshat is to, as he's pointing, to bring out he deliberately wore a garment which was less attractive and, so to speak, lower on Friday, so that when he changed out of it, the contrast would be greater when he changed out from that into his Shabbos clothes. A greater, so to speak, contrast than if he'd just taken his normal everyday clothes, put those aside and put his Shabbos clothes on. There's another idea that this was actually that wasn't the reason. Another pshat is that he wore, it's actually something like an apron that you wear for cooking. It's black because it doesn't show the stains and the marks of working. And he would wear that even when he actually wasn't cooking, just to show that it's fit on Friday, to show that I'm working for Shabbos. I'm in my workman's clothes. That's another pshat. One's A person shouldn't be concerned with getting himself dirty in order to be matriach himself, in order to do everything that's necessary for Shabbos. And of course, sometimes that requires physical work, and a person can get dirty doing that. But the Ramchal's pshat is that it should be conspicuous. Kadeshia nika yoseh kavod Shabbos belavosh velovshoy bo begodim noim. As we said, when he changed out into his finest garments for Shabbos, or fine garments for Shabbos, it's going to be more recognizable. Nimsa shelo lavad hachana l'Shabbos hu mechlal hakavod. So we see, it's not just what you call it, the actions. It's not just sort of the active preparation for Shabbos, but ela afilu ha'eder shemekoche yibochein yoseh mitzius. That a person should, so to speak, create a void, a trough, somewhere where he can actually go down in some way on Friday to feels the elevation of Shabbos all the more. Many things a person can do. I remember once finding a particular nice brand of shampoo, which is rather expensive, and I put that aside. That's my Shabbos shampoo. And all of these things, you'd be surprised. I mean, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but they really do work. They really give a person of preparing himself for the correct attitude to be Makabel Shabbos. They said that, I think Ramosha, the Chovetz Chaim used to sit, we would be ready for Shabbos by Chatzois, and he would sit on his veranda in Radin, and he would just sit there waiting for Shabbos. He would actively Likra Shabbos. He was prepared and waiting like one would to see, coming over the hill, your guest, waiting for the guest to arrive. It's a very good thing to do on usually Friday afternoon is a rush, but it really shouldn't be. It always amazes me that however late Shabbos comes in, a person's always rushing. I mean, it's about 3 hours difference between Shabbos coming in the winter and the summer. Yet it's a lack of preparation, a lack of thought. A person should really try as much as possible. I remember somebody told me, I think I saw it in the book somewhere, why do we say Guten Erev Shabbos? So he said, because just what we're saying now, Erev Shabbos is typically a time where people get into arguments, people fight, people rush. So we wish somebody that their Erev Shabbos should be good, not just their Shabbos. But again, it's as much as one can, as much as one can sort of prepare a calm space that he goes into Shabbos with. I remember I had a chavrusa with somebody once, and our chavrusa started just before tziftzuf, before the siren. It was such a lovely feeling. That siren was almost like a song to us, as we were sitting there learning, to hear the siren coming in. And these things, they're very easy to lose them because, things do come up, and especially when you get married and the kids, and this got spilled and that. But as much as a person can bring it in Shabbos, and that's the idea of bringing Shabbos early, is to be mechabed. You don't rush into, to see the king. You don't rush in there and say, oh, hi, Your Majesty, how are you doing? A person collects himself, gathers himself. And of course, the same should be true for Shabbos. But again, like many things in life, it's something that if you don't constantly work on it, it slowly gets whittled away. Slowly gets, down to the line where it's, of course, in Yerushalayim HaKodesh, Baruch Hashem, we have 40 minutes because of Rov Kedushasa of Yerushalayim. We bring in Shabbos 40 minutes early, but even before that, the person should try and be ready, come in calmly to Shabbos. Okay. That is the section we've been dealing with. Yeah, sorry, there's another thing he says here as well. V'chein oslik boya suda be'erev Shabbos mipnei koved Shabbos. There's a halacha that a person shouldn't sit down to different shitas, but the basic idea is shouldn't sit down to a large meal on erev Shabbos. Why? Because he should again create this sort of emptiness or space or a feeling of lacking in order that it could be filled by Shabbos. This is the Ramchal's Chiddush. Okay. Now, the next subject, the next area we're going to go into is, I think maybe we'll we'll take a pause here because now we're going to next week, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to be dealing with the idea of Kavod Torah and what that actually involves. Okay, leave it here.